Welcome to Sound Doctrine. Imagine for a moment that someone just walked up to you today and offered you literally everything.
Just everything. The whole world.
Exactly. Like they slide this contract across the table and it guarantees you limitless wealth, perfect health for the rest of your life, unshakable social status, just absolute power. Every single thing the world has to offer is yours.
And, I mean, most of us would sign that without even a second thought. Right?
Oh, 100%. I'd ask for a pen immediately. But then I want you to imagine looking that person right in the eye, sliding the contract back and saying, I am completely unsatisfied.
Yeah, which just sounds like sheer madness to the modern ear. Or, at best, just severe ingratitude.
Right. If you're listening to this deep dive on your commute right now or, while you're folding laundry, you're probably thinking, give me a fraction of that contract and I'll show you exactly how satisfied I can be.
Yeah, we all think we'd be the exception.
We do. But that exact scenario is our entry point today. We were taking a deep dive into a 400-year-old mystery, working our way through Chapter 2 of Jeremiah Burroughs' classic work, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment.
And it is such a rich chapter.
It really is.
Yeah.
And as your guides, reading and digesting this material alongside you, I just have to confess right up front that this chapter flipped my entire understanding of satisfaction completely upside down.
Yeah, it's definitely not what you'd expect.
No, it's not. Burroughs calls this contentment a mystery. And, he doesn't mean mystery like a hoodoo in a novel. He means it as this profound, almost paradoxical reality that just defies every natural instinct we have.
Exactly. He's being incredibly deliberate with that word mystery because back in the 17th century, a mystery often referred to a trade secret.
Well, like a guild or something.
Right, exactly. Like a highly specialized skill. You talk about the mystery of blacksmithing or the mystery of masonry. It wasn't something you just, stumbled into by having a naturally laid-back personality.
Because we do that today, right?
Right.
We look at certain people and think, oh, they're just naturally chill. Nothing really bothers them.
Right, we think it's a temperament thing. But Burroughs is arguing that true Christian contentment has absolutely nothing to do with your Myers-Briggs type or, your baseline personality.
Okay, so it's not just a genetic lottery.
No, not at all. It is an entirely different, totally countercultural way of operating in the world. And it has to be actively learned. As he puts it, you have to learn this in the school of Christ.
Which is actually incredibly freeing for those of us who, run a bit anxious.
Oh, absolutely.
But, Burroughs doesn't exactly ease us into this discipline. He drops this massive paradox right on the first page just to show us the scale of this mystery.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back at all.
He claims that a contented Christian is simultaneously the most contented person in the world and at the exact same moment, the most unsatisfied person in the world.
Yeah, that's a tough one to wrap your head around.
I had to read the paragraph 3 times when I first saw it. My brain just completely snagged on it.
It forces you to just stop and really rethink your definitions because to understand this paradox, we have to look at the theology of the human soul that Burroughs is working with here.
Right. He's basically defining the actual capacity of the soul.
Precisely. His underlying premise, which is deeply rooted in this older Augustinian tradition, is that the human soul possesses a capacity so vast, so infinite, that only the infinite God himself can actually fill it.
So it's an issue of volume almost.
Yeah, kind of. So let's look at the two sides of his paradox. On the one hand, a Christian can be perfectly content with a very, very low earthly status.
Like poverty or sickness.
Right. They can be navigating extreme financial hardship, battling a chronic illness, or just facing complete social obscurity, and yet genuinely experience this deep, settling contentment in those exact circumstances.
Because their contentment isn't tethered to those circumstances at all.
Exactly. But then, and here is the paradox, you flip the coin. That exact same person would be entirely fiercely unsatisfied if you were to offer them all the wealth, all the power, and all the pleasures of the entire world, but you subtracted God from the equation.
Because the world just isn't big enough to fill that void.
Right.
I was thinking about it like trying to fill the Grand Canyon with like a single cup of water.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter how sparkly or expensive the cup is. The math just doesn't work.
That is a perfect analogy. The world is simply too small for the human soul. If a Christian doesn't have God, possessing the entire globe just leaves them utterly hollow.
They realize they can't be bought off with temporary depreciating assets.
Right. And Burroughs actually brings in this striking historical detail that anchors this idea so beautifully. He references Martin Luther.
Oh, the great reformer.
Yeah. During the height of the Reformation, Luther was this massive thorn in the side of the political and religious establishment. I mean, dukes, princes, even representatives of the Pope were constantly trying to figure out a way to neutralize him.
And their first instinct, naturally, was bribery.
Of course, that's the standard operating procedure for worldly power, right?
Everyone has a price. Just find his price.
Exactly. So they offered him cardinal hats, massive wealth, immense political favor, basically saying, just name your price, Luther, and stop causing all this trouble.
But Luther refused them all. And the quote Burroughs pulls from Luther is just, it's fierce.
It really is.
Luther says, I did vehemently protest that God should not put me off, so 'tis not that which will content me.
Yeah, that posture is just staggering.
It is, because he isn't even just talking to the princes there, right? He is talking directly to God. He's essentially saying, do not try to pay me off with earthly riches. That is not what I was made for, and that is not what will satisfy me.
Right. He's recognizing that those earthly gifts, as glittering and prestigious as they are infinitely less than what his soul actually demands. To accept them as a substitute for God would be this profound downgrade.
A total downgrade.
And Burroughs roots this deep refusal of lesser things straight into the text of Scripture. He points us to the book of Philippians.
Right, the peace of God versus the God of peace.
Exactly. So first he looks at Philippians 4:7, which speaks about the peace of God, which passeth all understanding. Now, universally, everyone wants that.
Oh, absolutely. Even completely outside the church, people are just desperate for peace. We spend, what, billions of dollars on apps, retreats, therapies, just trying to get a fraction of that feeling of peace.
They really do.
Yeah.
But Burroughs contrasts that verse with one just 2 sentences later. In Philippians 4:9, Paul writes, "The God of peace shall be with you."
And that distinction is everything.
It is a massive critical distinction. It's the difference between having the peace of God, which is the effect, and having the God of peace, which is the cause.
Yeah, this was a major aha moment for me in reading this text.
Right.
Because he argues that a carnal heart, someone operating purely on a natural earthly level, they are totally satisfied just having outward peace.
Right. They just want the effect.
Give me the effect. Let my business run smoothly. Let my health remain stable. Let my relationships be completely free of conflict. If I have the effect, I'm good. I don't really care where it comes from.
Yeah, they want the comfort of the gifts without the relational demand of the giver.
Exactly.
But the godly heart, the individual who has actually entered that school of Christ we talked about, they look at that arrangement and say, no, outward peace isn't enough.
It's not enough.
In fact, even the internal psychological feeling of peace isn't enough if I don't actually possess the God of peace.
They demand the cause, not just the effect.
Yes, they want the relationship with the Creator, not just the fringe benefits of his creation.
Which means, practically, if they have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping the God of peace, they will gladly sacrifice the outward peace.
Every time.
Which completely shifts how we view our daily frustrations. And, this leads directly into how Burroughs attacks our modern sensibilities regarding how we actually attain this satisfaction.
Yeah, he really goes after our default logic here.
Because if I am honest, my default mode of operation, and I suspect the default mode for you listening right now, is based on an equation of addition.
Right, the idea of just needing a little bit more.
Constantly. I tell myself, I just need a slightly higher salary or a bit more square footage in my house.
A more reliable car.
A few more hours of free time. And then the math will finally balance out, right? My circumstances will finally rise to meet my desires, and boom, I will achieve contentment.
And it's not just you. Our entire economic structure is built on reinforcing that exact mathematical error. I mean, every advertisement, every social media feed is explicitly designed to tell you that contentment is just one single addition away.
But Burroughs completely counters this with a radically different mathematical operation.
He does?
He says you do not find contentment by adding to your circumstances to match your desires. You find it by subtracting from your desires until they match your current circumstances.
Subtraction.
Subtraction. And I have to tell you, my initial reaction to this was just intense resistance.
Oh, I'm sure it feels counterintuitive.
It feels like giving up. It feels like settling. In our culture, if you aren't aggressively expanding your desires and chasing them, you're seen as stagnant or lacking ambition.
Yeah, you're accused of not having any drive.
Right. But he is saying that when there's this massive, painful gap between what you have and what you want, you don't exhaust yourself trying to build a bridge of possessions to reach your desires. You just lower the bridge. You bring your desires down to reality.
And we really have to look closely at the why behind his argument here. Like, why is subtraction better than addition?
Yeah, why is it actually more effective?
Well, if you are constantly trying to add to your circumstances, you are running on a hedonic treadmill that literally never stops. Human desire, by its fallen nature, is infinitely expandable.
It never says enough.
Exactly. The moment you acquire the bigger house, your desires immediately expand to require nicer furniture to fill it, and then a better landscaping service to maintain the yard. The finish line is a mirage. It just recedes the closer you get to it.
The dopamine hit fades, and you are right back to baseline discontent.
Precisely. But if you practice the art of subtraction, if you discipline yourself to bring your desires down to meet exactly what God has providentially provided in this specific moment, you achieve equilibrium right now, today.
You don't have to wait.
Right. You don't have to wait for a promotion or a healing or a new relationship to finally be at rest. You are taking control of the only variable in the equation that you actually have power over, which is your own internal desires.
It's the difference between trying to carpet the entire world so you never step on a sharp rock versus just putting on a pair of shoes.
Oh, I love that.
Subtraction is putting on the shoes. But Burroughs doesn't stop with just altering our desires. He moves into how we handle the actual heavy burdens of life.
And this is where things get really challenging.
Very challenging. Because this is where I had to really argue with the text for a minute. He claims that Christian comes to contentment not by getting rid of the burden that is crushing them, but by adding another heavier burden to themselves.
Yeah, it sounds utterly illogical.
It defies basic physics. When I read that, I thought, Burroughs, you have officially lost the plot.
It really does sound crazy on the surface.
Right, because if I am hiking and my backpack weighs 50 pounds and my back is screaming in pain, and you walk up and hand me another 50-pound weight, I am not suddenly going to feel lighter. I'm going to collapse.
Of course.
So how on earth does adding a burden produce contentment?
To understand this, we have to look at the specific nature of the burdens he's comparing. Because he isn't talking about adding a second physical hardship to a first physical hardship.
Okay, so he's not saying, if you're poor, go break your leg too.
No, not at all. The other burden he is introducing into the equation is the spiritual burden of sin.
Oh, yeah.
Burroughs is describing this profound shift in spiritual psychology. He is arguing that when a person is granted the grace to truly feel the heavy, grievous weight of their own sin, when they genuinely comprehend the depth of their rebellion against a holy and perfect God, something radical happens to their perspective regarding their earthly struggle.
So it's an issue of proportion.
Yes. Think of it like a scale. On one side, you have your earthly afflictions, right? The financial stress, the unfair treatment at work, the physical pain.
And they feel incredibly heavy.
Very heavy, especially when they are the only thing on the scale. But then on the other side of the scale, you place the cosmic weight of having offended the creator of the universe.
Wow.
When a believer is mourning their sin and realizing the sheer magnitude of what they have been forgiven for, that earthly affliction suddenly shoots up into the air. It begins to feel incredibly light by comparison.
I see. So if I am deeply, genuinely broken over the fact that I have betrayed God, and I am just marveling at the fact that he hasn't immediately destroyed me for it.
Right.
Then the fact that, I don't know, someone scratched my car in the parking lot or that I got passed over for a promotion, it suddenly loses its gravitational pull on my mood.
Exactly. And this is so countercultural because modern psychology often tells us that to feel better, we need to alleviate all feelings of guilt and convince ourselves of our own inherent goodness.
Right. Forgive yourself, love yourself.
Yes. But Burroughs is arguing the exact opposite. He says that feeling the legitimate weight of your sin is actually the secret to lightening the load of your daily miseries.
That is wild.
The heavier the burden of sin becomes to a convicted heart, the lighter the burden of earthly affliction becomes. It shifts your entire center of gravity away from your temporary discomfort and toward your eternal state.
Which totally changes the objective when we are suffering.
Yeah.
Because our default prayer is always, God, take this away, make it stop, fix the circumstance.
Always.
But Burroughs argues that the mystery of contentment isn't necessarily about God removing the affliction. Sometimes the grace is that he leaves the affliction exactly where it is, but he fundamentally changes its nature.
Right. He removes the sting of it.
Yeah, he takes the poison out.
Burroughs refers to this almost like spiritual alchemy, We view a hardship, let's use poverty or chronic illness as an example. We view it as a natural evil.
Mm.
And in a fallen world, it is.
Sure, it's not good in and of itself.
Right. But grace doesn't always magically erase the poverty or cure the illness. The outward circumstance remains a hard reality. You have to wake up and navigate every single day. However, grace alters how that affliction operates within the ecosystem of your soul.
How so? Because the lack of money still means you can't pay the electric bill, right? The mechanics of poverty don't change.
The mechanics of the poverty don't change, but the fruit it produces does. Think about it. Without grace, poverty produces bitter envy, deep resentment, and despair. It operates as poison. But with grace, that exact same poverty becomes the very instrument God uses to forge humility, profound reliance on Him, and a richness in faith that the wealthy rarely ever experience.
So it changes from a poison into a medicine.
Exactly. The circumstance remains, but its nature is transformed. The sting, the part of the affliction that actually harms the soul, is completely neutralized.
That requires such a high level of spiritual vision to look at the thing causing you literal pain and say, this is medicine.
It really does.
And I think this ties directly into one of the most convicting parts of this chapter for me. Burroughs talks about what happens when our circumstances change for the worse and how we handle our present duties.
Oh, this section is so piercing.
It is. He exposes this mental trap that I fall into constantly. When life gets hard, we instinctively retreat into fantasizing about the past or projecting into the future.
Yeah, it is a very sophisticated, subtle form of escapism.
Right. We say things like, man, if I just hadn't lost that job, think of how much money I could be giving to the church right now. Or, if my health would just recover, I'd be so much more productive and patient with my family.
We all do it.
We construct this imaginary when-then world. When my circumstances improve, then I will be a stellar, contented Christian.
And we dress it up to look like spiritual zeal.
Yes.
We tell ourselves that we aren't complaining. We are just longing to serve God better. We are just frustrated that our current limitations are keeping us from being as awesome for God as we know we could be.
It sounds so noble.
It does. But Burroughs strips the pain off that immediately. He calls it out for exactly what it is. It's a temptation. It is a distraction engineered to breed deep, paralyzing discontent with the present moment.
Because we are essentially dictating terms to God. We are saying, I will be content and serve you, but only under the conditions that I have pre-approved.
Precisely.
So how do we break out of this when-then loop? If you're listening right now and you realize you spend half your day mentally living in a future that doesn't exist yet, what is the actual application here?
Burroughs' antidote is piercingly pragmatic. He says you must violently arrest your thoughts away from what you would do in different circumstances.
Violently arrest them.
Yes, because that is a fantasy world, and God does not require obedience in a fantasy world. Instead, you look ruthlessly at the exact, messy, difficult reality where you are right now, and you ask one single question.
Which is?
What is the specific duty of the circumstance God has placed me in today?
Grounding yourself in the present reality.
Yes. If you have lost your wealth, your duty is no longer to be a generous, magnanimous benefactor. God isn't asking that of you anymore. Your duty today is to demonstrate patience, quiet trust, and humility in the face of poverty.
Wow.
Or, if your health fails, your duty is not to run a marathon for a charity or volunteer 10 hours a week. Your duty is to glorify God through quiet endurance and trusting Him in the pain. When you focus intensely on the duty of your present reality, it literally starves the fantasizing discontent of its oxygen.
Because it pulls your mind out of the imaginary world where you are the hero and plants it firmly in the real world where God is the sovereign.
Exactly.
That is incredibly difficult, but you can see how it instantly cuts the root of anxiety.
Yeah.
You only have to be faithful with what is right in front of you today.
Just today's duty.
Now, this transitions us into a deeply internal phase of Burroughs' argument. We've talked about lowering desires and, changing how we view burdens, but now he introduces a concept he calls melting your will into God's will.
Such a powerful phrase.
And to explain this, he uses a fascinating legal and financial metaphor about transferred debt. Can we unpack the mechanics of this analogy? Because it is just brilliant.
It really is one of the clearest illustrations of surrender I've ever encountered. Burroughs asks his readers to imagine a scenario involving debt. And let's modernize it a bit for today.
Sure.
Imagine you owe a massive sum of money to a creditor, or actually, let's say someone owes you money. It's a debt you have the right to collect. But through a legal mechanism, you were able to entirely transfer that debt and the right to collect it over to a third party, let's say a trusted representative.
Okay, so you make the debt over to them. They now hold the paper.
Exactly. So the obligation has shifted hands. Now, if that third party, the person who now holds debt you transferred, if they are paid in full by the debtor and they are completely satisfied with the transaction, what is your status?
Well, legally speaking, my status is that I am satisfied.
Right. You do not sit around angrily complaining, well, the money wasn't handed directly into my physical hands. I didn't get to count the cash myself.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You transferred your right to collect to the representative. If the representative is satisfied, you are legally and practically satisfied.
Okay, so let's map this onto the Christian experience. What is the debt and who is the representative?
Burroughs applies this directly to our personal desires, our ambitions, and our stubborn human will. He argues that a true Christian makes over their will to God.
They transfer it?
Yes. They take all their demands for how their life should go, their demands for health, for success, for fairness, and they legally and spiritually transfer that debt entirely over to God. They say, Lord, my will is no longer my own to collect on. I transfer it to you.
Man, that is a terrifying level of surrender.
It is the death of the ego. But look at the profound peace that follows the logic. If you have truly transferred your will to God, then whenever God's will is satisfied, you are forced to conclude that your will is satisfied. If God providentially decides that a season of hardship is what satisfies his sovereign, loving plan for you, you look at that hardship and say, well, I transferred my will to him. He is content with how this is unfolding. Therefore, because my will is melted into his, I am content.
It's the ultimate hack against disappointment.
It really is.
It's not just white-knuckling through a bad situation and gritting your teeth, saying, well, I guess I have to do what God says, because that still implies you have a separate competing will that is just being suppressed.
Right. That's just stoicism.
But Burroughs is talking about a complete metallurgical melting down of your personal ambition until it is literally indistinguishable from the providential will of God.
Yeah.
What God wants is what you want because you gave your wants to him.
And that leads directly to his next point about where the actual battleground of contentment lies. Because if our will needs to be melted, it means the problem isn't external.
Right. He talks about purging the inside. And I'll be honest, this was a direct hit on my daily habits.
It hits all of us.
Whenever I feel a spike of discontent or stress or anxiety, my immediate, almost autonomic response is to bring something external in to fix my mood.
Medication by consumption.
Exactly. If I've had a brutal day at work, I think, I need to order expensive takeout, or I need to buy that thing sitting in my online cart, or I need to plan a vacation. We constantly try to medicate internal unrest by shoving external comforts into the void.
It is the illusion that a change in environment or a change in possessions can somehow cure a disease of the soul.
Exactly. But Burroughs references James 4:1, which asks a very blunt question. From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even if your lusts that war in your members.
Yeah, Johns does not pull any punches.
Not at all. So Burroughs points out that the mystery of contentment isn't about bringing good things in. It's about purging the internal rot out. He specifically uses the phrase, purging out the lusts and bitter humors.
That phrase, bitter humors, is fascinating and requires just a little bit of historical context to really grasp.
Oh, please break that down.
So, in the 17th century, Burroughs was operating under the medical paradigm of Galen, the ancient Greek physician. The prevailing medical theory at the time was that the human body was filled with 4 distinct fluids, or humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm.
Like the 4 temperaments.
Exactly, the 4 temperaments. And the belief was that all physical disease was caused by an imbalance or a corruption of these internal humors. So if you were violently ill, the doctor didn't give you a painkiller to mask the symptom.
They tried to get rid of the humor.
Right. They tried to purge the corrupted humor out of your body through various and often very unpleasant methods. So Burroughs is taking this widely understood medical concept of his day and applying it directly to the soul.
So bringing in external comforts to quiet a complaining heart is basically like giving a painkiller to someone whose internal organs are failing.
Yeah.
It's just a Band-Aid over a tumor.
Precisely. The external comfort, the takeout, the shopping, the vacation might distract you for an hour, but the root cause of your discontent, the pride, the entitlement, the deep-seated self-love, the expectation that you deserve a frictionless life, all of those bitter humors are still festering inside.
They haven't gone anywhere.
Right. The mystery of contentment is doing the grueling, surgical, internal work of repenting of those attitudes and actively purging them out. When the inside is cleansed of entitlement, the outside circumstances completely lose their power to dictate your peace.
And when that internal purging happens, it clears your vision to see what he describes next. And honestly, this might be the most beautiful imagery in the entire chapter.
It is stunning.
He talks about living on the dew of God's blessing and seeing love in absolutely everything. He uses this striking illustration of a sailor's wife.
Yeah.
If you were listening, just try to put yourself in this emotional space. He asked you to imagine a wife whose husband has been far away at sea for a very long time.
The distance is painful. The separation is incredibly hard.
Right. But one day, she receives a package, and in it is a small token of his love.
Just a simple letter, perhaps, or a small, inexpensive piece of jewelry.
Right. Something with very little actual monetary value.
Yeah.
But to her, because it comes directly from the hands of the one she loves, and because it carries the specific intention of his affection, that small token is worth infinitely more than if, a complete stranger backed up a truck and dumped a pile of gold bars on her front lawn.
It is a deeply resonant image of relational weight versus material value, and Burroughs uses it to describe how a contented Christian actually interacts with the physical world.
How so?
While the secular world might look at a faithful believer and see someone who has very little. They might have a tiny apartment, a meager income, and a pantry with just the basics. From a worldly math perspective, they are poor, but what the world cannot see is that upon every single one of those meager small things rests the secret dew of God's blessing.
So they aren't just objects anymore.
No, they are tokens. When the Christian sits down to a simple meal of rice and beans, they do not just see carbohydrates and calories. They receive that small portion of food as a direct, intentional token of love from a father who is actively caring for them.
Wow.
The relational weight attached to the rice and beans makes it a feast that a billionaire eating caviar cannot comprehend, because the billionaire only has the food, they don't have the father's blessing.
Okay, I track with that when we are talking about positive things.
Right.
Even small positive things like a simple meal. But Burroughs pushes this into what I think is terrifying territory.
He does.
He says the mystery is that they can see God's love not just in the good things, but even in the severe afflictions. And if I'm being completely honest, I want to push back hard.
That's a very natural response.
Because it is one thing to see God's love in a modest paycheck. It is an entirely different thing to look at a cancer diagnosis or the loss of a child or a devastating betrayal and say, this is a token of love from my husband at sea. That feels almost psychologically abusive to demand of someone.
Yeah, it would be abusive if God were a capricious tyrant just playing games with our pain. And you are so right to feel the friction here, because this is the absolute summit of Christian contentment. It is where human reasoning completely runs out of oxygen.
It really is.
How does someone look at profound suffering and see a token of love? It only works if you have actually achieved that melting of the will we talked about earlier.
Okay, connect those dots for me.
If you truly believe that God is infinitely wise, infinitely good, and that he is orchestrating every single atom of the universe for your ultimate eternal glory, then logically you must conclude that the specific trial he has permitted to enter your life is not an accident.
It is a surgical strike.
Yes, it is a severe mercy. It is a trial designed specifically to burn away the dross that is keeping you from him. And because the ultimate goal of love is to draw the beloved closer, the Christian, by faith, looks at the hardship and says, there is love in this too.
Even in the pain.
Even in the pain. This is also a token from my Father, designed for my eternal good, even if it is tearing me apart right now.
But practically speaking, how? Because if I am listening to this and I am currently sitting in the ashes of my life, the theological logic might make sense on paper, but I don't have the strength to actually do it.
No one does on their own.
And thankfully, Burroughs doesn't just leave us with an impossible Stoic checklist. He moves into what we could call the how-to section. He points directly to Christ as the mediator and the literal source of our strength.
This is where the doctrine shifts from moral philosophy into the actual mechanics of grace. If you try to endure suffering just by clenching your fists and telling yourself it's for your own good, you will eventually snap.
You'll just break.
Exactly. Burroughs says that a godly person finds contentment in their suffering by looking intently at the suffering of Jesus Christ.
He argues that Christ's poverty and pain changed the actual molecular structure of our poverty and pain. He says it takes the poison out of it.
That is the theological concept of mediation. When a believer realizes that Christ, the eternal Son of God who owned the cosmos, voluntarily chose to have no place to lay his head, to be scorned, rejected, and to suffer immense physical agony, it completely recontextualizes their own pain.
Because Christ took the curse.
Right, because Christ bore the ultimate curse of sin on the cross, the punitive wrath of God has been fully exhausted. Therefore, if you are in Christ, your afflictions are no longer punitive curses from an angry, vengeful judge.
The poison of the curse has been drawn out.
Your afflictions are now sanctified tools from a loving Father who is conforming you to the image of his Son. When you view your poverty through the lens of Christ's voluntary poverty, the sting of feeling abandoned by God is removed.
And he doesn't just stop at Christ being our psychological example or like our theological shield.
Yeah.
He talks about Christ as a literal, real-time source of borrowed strength.
Yes, borrowed strength.
He cites John 1:16, which says, "We receive grace for grace," and Psalm 18:2, where David declares, "The Lord is my strength." And the way Burroughs explains his concept of borrowed strength just blew my mind. He introduces this spiritual math. He says, if your burden is doubled, but Christ trebles your strength, the burden is actually lighter.
It is brilliant counterintuitive physics. The philosophers of Burroughs' day, the Stoics, the humanists, they would have completely scoffed at this.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the world's philosophy has always been that when adversity strikes, you have to dig deep within yourself, find your inner resilience, and overcome.
Pull yourself up by your bootstrap.
Exactly. But Christianity says the exact opposite. Christianity says you are weak, you are fragile, and you will break. But you can be strengthened by someone else. You can draw on an external, infinite reservoir.
You are plugged into a generator that isn't your own battery.
Exactly. So play out his math. If your life circumstances suddenly get twice as hard, say you lose your job and your car breaks down in the same week, your natural instinct is absolute despair.
The weight has doubled.
The weight has doubled. But if, in that exact moment of crisis, faith reaches out and draws down 3 times the strength from the mediating Christ, what is the net result?
You're stronger than before.
The math dictates that you actually feel lighter and more capable than you did before the trouble even started. The burden is heavier, but the shoulder bearing it has been supernaturally reinforced.
It is the secret to how martyrs sang hymns in prison cells. It wasn't human adrenaline, it was borrowed strength.
Amen.
Okay, we have to talk about the analogies. Burroughs is an absolute master illustrator, and in his section on making up wants in God, he provides 2 of the most memorable, visceral analogies in the entire book.
They are unforgettable.
They really are. If you take nothing else away from this deep dive, these 2 images will stick in your mind. I want to unpack both of them enthusiastically. So first, he gives us what we can call the closed pipe analogy.
Walk us through it.
He asks the reader to imagine a homeowner who has a large house, and water is supplied to this house through several different plumbing pipes. But the homeowner goes into the wash house, the place where the heavy, necessary work needs to be done, and realizes there just isn't enough water pressure flowing into the basin.
So what does he do?
Well, what does a smart homeowner do? He doesn't panic. He walks around the perimeter of the house and purposefully stops up or caps off all the other minor pipes.
It is a very practical, everyday image for people of the 17th century, and it translates flawlessly to our modern lives. The physics of water pressure dictate that if you close off the leaks and the divergent channels, all that pressure is forced to flow in the one primary direction where it is actually needed.
So let's translate the metaphor. Who is the homeowner and what is the water?
God is the sovereign homeowner, and your affections, your love, your attention, your mental bandwidth, your emotional energy are the water. When things in our lives are going smoothly, our affections tend to flow out through dozens of different pipes. We pour our emotional energy into our career advancement, our hobbies, our bank accounts, our physical fitness, our social reputation.
Right, Burroughs says our affections run waste to the creature. We start loving the gifts far more than the giver. The water pressure meant for the wash house is just trickling out into the garden.
Yes. Our hearts become fractured and distracted by good things that we have elevated into ultimate things. So what does God do when he sees the precious water of our affections draining away into temporary things that cannot actually sustain us?
He steps in.
In his profound mercy, he walks around the house of your life and he starts capping off those pipes.
Which, to us, feels like a disaster.
It feels like an absolute deprivation. A financial stream dries up. A promotion is blocked. A social status is stripped away. We scream and cry because the pipe we loved has been sealed.
We think God is angry with us.
But the profound synthesis here is that God is not being cruel. He is not a cosmic killjoy trying to make you miserable. He is purposefully, intentionally stopping those pipes so that the full fierce force of your affection will have nowhere else to go but to flow wholly and powerfully back to him, because he knows that he is the only place your soul can actually find rest.
Wow. He cuts off the lesser loves to force us back to the ultimate love. And, if that analogy wasn't convicting enough, Burroughs immediately follows it up with one that hits even harder, especially for anyone who is a parent.
The dismissed nurse.
Yes, the dismissed nurse analogy. He says, imagine a wealthy mother who hires a servant or a wet nurse to help care for her infant child. The nurse is doing a good job providing comfort and food.
Doing what she was hired to do.
Right. But over time, the mother starts to notice a subtle shift. The child is beginning to love the nurse more than the mother. When the child is scared, it reaches for the servant. It clings to the nurse and ignores the mother. So what does the true mother do? She dismisses the servant. She sends the nurse entirely away.
It is a deeply emotional, painful scenario. Think about it from the child's perspective. When the nurse is sent away, the child is devastated.
The child cries bitterly because the immediate comfort they had grown used to is suddenly gone.
They don't understand the complex relational dynamics. They just know they are hurting. But why did the mother do it? Was it out of malice toward the child? Was it to punish the baby?
No, it was out of a fiercely protective, jealous, proper love.
Exactly. The mother intends that the affections of her child, which were running in the wrong channel toward a hired servant, will now return and run strongly toward herself, the true mother. She is willing to endure the temporary crying of the child to secure the ultimate relational bond.
That is so deeply convicting when you map it onto our lives. When God suddenly removes a profound comfort from our lives, maybe it's a career we drew all our identity from, or financial security, or even a relationship that we had begun to idolize and rely on more than him, our instinct is to cry like the child. We feel abandoned.
But Burroughs is saying, no, that is the mother sending away the nurse. God sees that you are clinging to the servant of his provision rather than the reality of his presence.
Wow.
He wants to be, as Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15:28, all in all to you.
He removes the competing affections so that he can be your all in all. C.S. Lewis famously called this a severe mercy, didn't he?
He did. It is a mercy because it saves you from idolatry, but it's severe because the surgery hurt.
It's severe mercy. I love that phrasing. All right, let's move into the final movement of this deep dive. We've covered a lot of internal, almost defensive postures, right? Melting the will, purging the inside, accepting the closed pipes.
Right, lots of internal work.
But in this final section, Burroughs shifts gears entirely. He talked about getting contentment from covenant promises and realizing the glorious things of heaven. And as I was reading this, I noticed a distinct shift in his tone. It moves from passive endurance to this very active, external, almost aggressive hope.
Yes, the posture of the Christian in this final section is not just hunkering down and taking the hits. It is an active claiming of reality. Burroughs argues that a gracious heart finds deep, unshakable contentment by looking at the specific, unbreakable promises God has made in his covenant.
They aren't just crossing their fingers.
No, the Christian doesn't just rely on vague optimism. They rely on legal divine guarantees.
And the detail he brings out regarding the promise in Hebrews 13:5 is just spectacular. I want to highlight this because it changes how you read the verse. In our English translations, Hebrews 13:5 says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee.
Which is beautiful. It is comforting enough on its own.
It is. But Burroughs digs into the original Greek grammar behind that specific verse, and it reveals something explosive.
It truly is one of the most emphatic statements in all of Scripture. In the English, we have a simple double negative, never leave nor forsake. But in the original Greek text, God does not just use one or two negatives. He stacks 5 negatives on top of each other in a single sentence. 5. It is emphatic to the point of being grammatically intense, almost breaking the rules of grammar to make a point. If you were to translate it literally, it reads roughly like this. I will not leave you. No, I will not. I will not. I will not. I will not.
That is unbelievable.
It is an absolute, overwhelming, passionate guarantee of God's permanent presence and protection.
When you realize that the creator of the universe is speaking to you with that level of fierce intensity, it completely reframes the promise. It is not a casual, hey, don't worry, I'll be around if you need me. It is a fierce, blood-bought commitment. I am not leaving you.
And how does that produce contentment? Well, Burroughs uses another brilliant analogy of an heir riding over a series of fields. He asks us to imagine 2 men riding horses through a vast, beautiful landscape. One man is just a stranger passing through, and the other man is the legal heir who is destined to inherit all the land they are riding over.
Okay, they're looking at the exact same physical reality.
Yes. But when the stranger looks around, what does he see? He sees grass, dirt, trees, maybe a nice farmhouse. He thinks, what a lovely view, nice scenery. And that is the end of his experience. But when the heir looks at the exact same grass, dirt, and trees, what does he say?
He says, this is my inheritance. This all belongs to me.
Exactly. The heir looks at the property and realizes, this is my future. This is my security. Burroughs argues that this is exactly how a Christian is supposed to read the Bible. A carnal person or a stranger to grace opens the Bible and just sees stories, ancient historical accounts, maybe some nice moral advice.
It is just literary scenery to them.
But a Christian, the heir reads the promises of God, like Isaiah 43, when thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. And they do not just see nice poetry. They say, that is my inheritance. That specific promise belongs to me right now.
They actively claim it.
They actively claim the promises, and that active claiming produces deep contentment, regardless of how chaotic their current circumstances are.
Because they know exactly what is in their spiritual bank account, even if their earthly bank account is overdrawn. They are fully funded by the promises of God. Which brings us to the final, beautiful image of the chapter. He closes out this incredible exploration of the mystery of contentment with an evocative metaphor of a sailor. Walk us through that final scene.
It is the perfect concluding metaphor because it acknowledges the reality of the pain we endure. He paints a picture of a sailor caught in a violent, terrifying storm at sea. It is night, the waves are crashing over the deck, the wind is howling, and the ship is being tossed violently.
It's terrifying.
The sailor is deeply troubled. It is a miserable, frightening experience. He isn't pretending the storm isn't happening. But then, as the sun begins to rise, through the rain and the mist, the sailor finally spots a landmark on the horizon. He sees the haven, he sees home.
But the storm hasn't stopped yet.
No, the storm is still raging, the waves are still crashing against the hull, but suddenly, internally, everything shifts for the sailor. Because the destination is securely in sight, the storm becomes endurable. The panic subsides.
The knowledge of the destination fundamentally changes the experience of the journey.
Precisely. Burroughs points us to Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 4:17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory.
A far more exceeding weight.
When a Christian, by faith, actively makes the reality of heaven present in their mind, when they spot the haven on the horizon, the current storms of life lose their power to create ultimate despair. Burroughs writes that one single drop of the sweetness of heaven is enough to take away all the bitterness of all the afflictions in the entire world.
That is a staggering claim. But if heaven is real, it has to be true. Let's take a breath and just try to synthesize this incredible journey we have just been on. We set out today to understand why Burroughs calls Christian contentment a mystery.
And it certainly is one.
And I think it is safe to say it is infinitely more profound than just looking on the bright side or lowering our blood pressure. Contentment is an entirely alternate reality. It is the math of subtraction, lowering our desires to meet our circumstances, rather than running on the treadmill of consumerism.
It is realizing that feeling the weight of our sin actually makes the weight of our earthly trials feel light.
It is the terrifying but liberating act of melting our will into God's will so that we consider our debt paid when He is satisfied. It is learning the counterintuitive physics of borrowing strength from Christ the Mediator, knowing that His suffering drew the poison out of ours.
And perhaps most convictingly, it is viewing the painful moments in life, the cut pipes, the dismissed nurse, not as acts of divine cruelty, but as a severe mercy from a God who is passionately jealous for our affections, redirecting our love back to the only place it can survive.
It is a massive, incredibly dense doctrinal pill to swallow. And I want to bring this directly home to you, the listener, right where you are. It is entirely valid if you are feeling a sense of friction or realizing how difficult this actually is.
Oh, absolutely. This teaching goes against every single natural instinct of self-preservation, self-pity, and self-gratification that we possess as fallen humans. You cannot achieve this by just trying harder tomorrow. It requires a radical moment-by-moment dependence on the grace of Christ.
But I also hope you see how incredibly, breathtakingly freeing this doctrine is. Think about the alternative. If your contentment is tied to the shifting sands of your earthly circumstances, you are always vulnerable. You are always one phone call away from despair.
But if you learn this mystery, if your contentment is rooted in the unchanging cause rather than the temporary effect, you are suddenly untouchable.
You are free from the endless, exhausting treadmill of needing just a little more. You can actually be at peace right now in the middle of the storm because you have spotted the haven on the horizon.
That's the rare jewel.
And that leads us to our final thought for today. A question for you to take with you and mull over long after this audio stops playing. Look closely at your life right now. Examine the biggest source of frustration, the most painful area of lack, or the deepest disappointment you are currently carrying. We all have one. What if, rather than being an obstacle to your happiness, what if that exact frustration is a specific water pipe God has intentionally closed, so that your ultimate undivided affection finally reaches Him? Think on that. We will see you next time.